Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Lemley, and I think we're going to get started this morning on our web seminar. First, I want to thank you all for taking the time to be on today's web seminar, which is entitled Getting the Most Out of the THP Plus Participant Tracking System. Before we begin, we're just going to make sure that everyone is technically set, and so I'm going to go here and share some technical information with you. Hopefully you're all able to see the screen. The call-in number for today is listed on the screen, as well as the access code. Now, what always makes these web seminars the most interesting is when we respond to your real questions. And so we hope that as you have them throughout the course of the web seminar, you'll type them in. Either Simone or I will be monitoring them throughout the course of the web seminar, and we will do our best to answer them all. Particularly today's web seminar, we really want you to leave with a good understanding of how this can be a useful tool for you, for the people you work with, to give you insight about the young people that you as a provider or you as a county are serving. And it is being recorded, and the recording as well as the presentation are going to be posted at the THP Plus website, which is below. I guess we'll take it from there. So today presenting will be myself, Amy Lemley. I'm the Policy Director at the John Burton Foundation, and my colleague, Simone Turek, a Policy Associate. And before we jump into the content, I just want to give a little bit of an explanation about why we are putting so much time and effort into the participant tracking system. For those of you who participate in our monthly calls, you may have noticed we're really taking every opportunity to discuss this system, to share information from it and promote its utilization. And what this is really about is important policy change that has gone into effect that potentially could have very serious implications for THP Plus, and that's 2011 realignment. I'm sure as many, if not all of you know, this is a policy change that really affected THP Plus. In the past, if a county did not want to implement THP Plus, of course it had that discretion, but it meant that it would not receive an allocation from the state of California. So if you didn't want to implement it, you didn't get an allocation, and that was a choice that a handful of counties made. Under 2000 realignment, the allocation for THP Plus has been made essentially to the state permanently, to the county permanently, and counties now have the discretion as to whether they want to implement THP Plus. And however, unlike in the past, instead of being able to say, well, we don't want to implement it, we will not receive an allocation, they are able to allocate those resources towards other child welfare activities. So this is a new level of local decision-making discretion. And it means the program can be reduced. It also means the program can be expanded. And so for all of you out there as county administrators and THP Plus providers, it gives you a new opportunity to have a conversation with your local administrators, with your local elected officials. But it also puts in your lap a new responsibility to make the case for THP Plus in a way that potentially wasn't necessary locally as much. In the past, a lot of state-level advocacy occurred, and now we really see that conversation more and more needing to happen to the county level. And I think it's not good or bad, it's just a change really. And so the participant tracking system is a really important tool to help you have an informed conversation with your colleagues in your programs, with your colleagues in the county who administer the program, with your elected officials who make those very important decisions that affect your program. So that's just a little bit why we are putting the time and effort we are into the participant tracking system. So here's THP Plus in a snapshot. This isn't new information to any of you on the call. You're almost all administrators and program operators. We do have the program in 50 counties. We have 57 different community-based organizations that operate the program, and a number of them operate in multiple counties. So that's how you get the difference between 57 service providers and 81 different programs. So for example, I'm sure many of you are aware of Aspiranet, a really wonderful nonprofit that operates in many counties. And together, these 57, service providers serve over 2,000 young people annually. And this information is included in a annual report that the John Burton Foundation develops each year, and we try and usually get it out by the September following the end of the fiscal year. So a little bit about the participant tracking system. What is it? Why is it? Some of you on the call are considering joining it, and I'm just going to say a word about it before we jump into the real meat, which is some really exciting examples we're going to provide about how you can use this information. But it's a web-based database. It was developed by the John Burton Foundation due to the very generous support of the California Wellness Foundation and the Walter S. Johnson Foundation in close consultation with the California Department of Social Services, counties, and providers. We spent a lot of time asking a variety of stakeholders what would be useful, what information should we know, and through about an 18-month process developed this database. It's specifically for the THP Plus program. It collects participant-level demographic and outcome data. It's highly secure. There are multiple backup security functions so that it meets the most stringent level of security for a web-based database. And finally, it's free of charge. It's offered, with the generous support of those foundations. We're able to make this available to any THP Plus provider or county administrator who wants to use it. So currently in California, there are about 1,400 young people in THP Plus on any given day. And 855 of their cases are in the participant tracking system. So you might ask, where are the other ones? There are a number of providers that use efforts to outcomes, ETO, or use a separate little spreadsheet, or use paper case files. We're working to increase this 62% as much as possible. And for the providers who do use ETO, we have a capacity to synchronize that data. So ETO is a wonderful and powerful database, so we don't discourage its utilization. But if you're not using ETO, we would love you to join the participant tracking system family so that your data can be added to the data that we currently have. In terms of providers, again, there are 57 different providers. 40 of them enter their data into the PTS. And in terms of the counties, we have, as you saw in the previous slide, there are 50 counties implementing THP Plus. 21 of them, the administrators use the participant tracking system. So hopefully we have some county administrators that are on the web seminar who will have their interest piqued. Because if you have contracted providers in your county, you're able to become a PTS user and essentially access that data. And that's a great way to understand what the dynamics of the program are and to use it for those purposes. So that's kind of what the PTS currently looks like. Getting started, this is a little overview of when and how often data is submitted. And again, when a young person enters the program, every quarter an update is entered at exit, at 6 months, and then from 12 months from exit. Now the best data we have in the system, I would say, is the first 3 orange columns. The 6-month and the 12-month exit is not, there's so many challenges, as we all know, to identifying those young people, staying in touch with them, working to know what information, to update that information accurately. So I think the most rigorous data we have is that entrance data, which really paints an amazing picture of where young people in THP Plus are when they enter, the quarterly information, and then at exit. So from entrance to exit is a very interesting snapshot of what our program is doing. So a little bit more. So what data is collected? What goes into the hopper? Demographic data. As you can see, the different characteristics that are collected here. And this is so important for us. I mean, thanks to collecting this demographic data, we know that almost 1 in 5 young people in THP Plus is a custodial parent. We know that at least, 8% of young people report that they are LGBTQ. we know that around 9%, 8 to 9%, depending on kind of what time of the year, have a serious disability that prevents them from working, as well as all race and ethnicity data, as well as are they coming from probation, are they coming from dependency. It really gives us a very good snapshot of what young people are experiencing. It also provides housing information. I think the assumption when THP Plus began is that all young people were going to transition seamlessly from foster care. We now know from this housing data that that is really usually not the case. We know what placement they're coming from. If they didn't come straight from care, we know what other type of housing they're coming from. And very powerfully, we know how many come from homelessness. Employment and income data. This is extremely interesting as well. Are they working? How much are they working? How much are they earning? Are they getting public benefits? Are they getting some other kind of financial support? And then, of course, education and training, what we all hope our young people are doing. Are they enrolled? And the key question, are they staying enrolled? Because we all know it's easy to register a young person for school, but it's much harder to help retain them in school. So, you know, these are just wonderful pieces of information. And I think the most important use of this information is to ask ourselves, are we serving our young people as well as we can? To pique our curiosity, to really try and understand what is going on in our program. What assumptions do we hold? And what does the data say? Are those assumptions true or not? Because I know as a former executive director of a nonprofit, sometimes we can really be anchored in almost in a certain experience that a small subset of our participants are experiencing. And it's so helpful to reflect back on the data as a whole. And usually what I found is the news is a lot better than what we're anchored to in our mind, because we're often anchored to that subset of young people that are struggling. So here's the process of becoming a participant tracking system user. Again, this is free of charge. The first thing you do is contact Simone Trek, who's sitting right next to me. You sign a user agreement. From there, you kind of want to think with your staff about how you want to enter data. And this is more art than science. Some programs have case managers enter data directly, and then they'll get usernames and passwords for all of their case managers. Some have your case managers fill a paper form out, and then they give it to like an admin person. And then that has different pros and cons. So there's no one way that we will say is the best way. It's what you want to do as a provider or as a county, what you think has the best system of accountability and controls. Organizations, some organizations, the case managers are entering data directly all the time, and others, that just isn't consistent with the culture of their organization. They tend to focus more clinically, and then they have kind of more of an administrative infrastructure. But once you know what you want to do, you let us know, and we give you as many usernames and passwords as you need. Then we have online training, as well as if you're just like, you know, I don't really want to do it online, we're happy to either come to your site or walk you through it on the telephone. And then you start entering data. It's that simple. So we do have a step-by-step tutorial about how to do that. And if you want more information, that's definitely not the purpose of today's web seminar, but we just do want you to know that that is something that is possible. So I'm going to go over a few reports, and then I'm going to turn it over to Simone to talk about some really exciting examples. And these are examples that we have gotten from you. When we developed the system, the question was like, what do you want to know about your program? What do you want to know about the programs in your county? So reports are kind of divided into two categories. The first little set is administrative reports, and the second are participant reports. And the administrative reports, we use a lot of them to try and make sure all the data is being entered. You can also use them in terms of understanding, you know, how many kids we're serving. Are we entering data for all the young people that we think we're serving? The real juicy part comes in the participant reports. And these are what I referenced before. The entrance snapshot, the quarterly snapshot, which is essentially every quarter, all the young people in your program. It takes a moment-in-time snapshot where they are academically, where they are educationally, and a number of other criteria. The quarterly state comparison, so that's another report that'll compare your program snapshot or your county's snapshot to the state. So you can see, wow, we have more parenting youth, or we have a higher proportion of parenting youth than perhaps the state, or maybe we have a lower proportion, or maybe we're really good at getting young people jobs, but we're having a hard time getting them enrolled in school. So this isn't meant to say you're good or bad, but it's to help you have a reference point to think about how you're doing relative to the state. Progress report, can be run on an individual young person or on all of your participants of entrance to exit. What are they doing? What did we accomplish in this time? And then you can export the full participant data as well. So there's no lack of information. And I think in some ways the challenge is, okay, I'm a busy administrator. My job is not to sit around and wade through data. What should I be looking at? And that is kind of the purpose of today's web seminar is I get questions from people. How do I use this system to answer them? And so what you see in front of you is the format for running these reports. There's a very quick and simple little button that you push. I think from here, we've talked about this in quite a bit of detail. I'm not sure we need to go through this too much more because we have kind of covered the demographics, the individual participant progress, the program progress over time. I think this is actually one thing I haven't highlighted is that a number of programs in the state now have been operating for 6-8 years. The participant tracking system hasn't been around quite that long. But what you can do is see, all right, what was our program duration in our first year? What was our program duration in our second year? How are we getting better, or hopefully not, how are we getting worse? But these are questions you could ask yourself. And I really want to emphasize, it's not to say you're a good program or a bad program. It's to start a conversation on your staff, and it's to start a conversation in your county so that you can work together. It's definitely not so you can grade yourself and say that's the bad provider and this is the good one. It's anyone who takes that approach, I think, isn't appreciating the complexity of these programs. I would argue every program does different things better and they do different things worse. But the key is knowing what you do well and knowing what you want to do better. These program reports can be used internally, and that's, again, maybe at a monthly staff meeting. Bring some data. Have that conversation with your case managers. At one THP Plus Institute we held a number of years ago, we played THP Plus Jeopardy, where we had the data on THP Plus, and then we also broke it down into categories, and we had people guess what the numbers were. And again, it was really surprising. In some areas, the perception was very close to the reality, but in other areas, it was very far away. And that was interesting because if you don't have the accurate information, it's very hard to make good decisions about your program. Secondly, externally, and that's reports to your funders, that's report to your individual donors, that's reports to your elected officials. That's using this information for a lot of different purposes that Simone is going to go through right now. So I'm going to hand mouse control over to Simone, a term that still makes me giggle a little bit, and let her take it away. Thank you, Simone.
Okay, so I'm just going to test here and make sure that my mouse control is functioning here. And it looks like it is. There's just a slight delay. Okay, so I'm going to run through a few different real-life examples. Some of them will be from the previous slide that you saw. And really, if you have questions about any of these examples, please do type your questions into the questions box on your control panel to the right side of your screen, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So our first example is going to focus on program development. And as you can see, this is a scenario where an organization has concerns that their participants are not staying for the full 24 months of the program. Amy kind of mentioned this a few minutes ago. The first thing the director of this program wants to know is, whether these concerns are valid. So sometimes we feel, anecdotally that we know something about our program or about our participants, but it's important, of course, for us to look at the numbers to see if we really have a problem. As Amy mentioned, with that Jeopardy game, some people were really close to knowing what the numbers were, and sometimes people were off. And it's always important to kind of see what the reality is before you start making any changes or trying new interventions. And before I start and go into this, I just want to say all the data that I'm going to be using today for these examples, it's real data from the participant tracking system. Of course, it will have no names, no county names, no provider names. You'll have no idea who it is, but it will be real data. So first, I'd just like to explain that there are two sections. Oh, and I'm not, for some reason, advancing here. Oh, there we go. There are two sections in the entrance to exit report. That's what you see here. You see section B. But I just want to explain what these two different sections are. Section A, which is not what you're seeing on the screen, returns counts and percentages for the questions included in the entrance forms and exit forms for all participants who have exited or entered THP Plus within the date range that you specify when you're pulling up the report. And then section B, which is what you see here, displays information on changes in participant status on 9 items. So just a side note, I want to back up here real quick. There are some really cool things about these reports. In addition to a date range, you can also choose to limit the report to provide data on youth who have been in the program for, longer than a certain number of months. So you could ask it to, just give me data on youth who have been in this program for 6 months or more. You can also ask it to just give you data on youth who are custodial parents or youth who aren't custodial parents, and that's a really great tool for comparing kind of what the reality is for those who are parents and aren't parents. So just jumping back to this particular example. So what I did here was left the date range blank. And so what that pulls up is all data. Like Amy said, some of these providers have been using the system since its inception and since 2008. And so it's going to pull up all the data that's been entered into the system for that provider. And so I did not ask the report to limit data to parenting or non-parenting youth, nor did I ask it to limit it to youth who have been in the program for longer than a specified number of months. So this is a very general report. And as you can see from this, sorry, I'm just making sure we're advancing here. There we go. As you can see from this section, B of the entrance to exit report is actually the first item on the list. It's average duration of enrollment. And you can see that the average is 10.89 months, so almost 11 months. And so really this is telling you that participants are staying on average for less than half the time of the full time of the program, which is they can stay up to 24 months in THP Plus. So that's a low average there. So then the person who's running this report, maybe the director of the program, may ask, well, this includes our first year. We were still adjusting and getting the hang of things. Maybe we've improved in this area. So you can then pull up the report, but specify a different date range. So say you want to look at just the past 2 years. You would select, the past 2 years, and you'd select Apply to Exit Date. And it will apply to participants who have exited during the past 2 years, regardless of when they entered. And so, that's the report I pulled up here. And as you can see, the average duration of enrollment has increased a bit by almost 3 months. And so now you can safely conclude that although progress has been made, perhaps this is an area that needs to be looked into further. So moving along, we have another example for you, and it's also going to be on program development, but a very different topic of interest here. So this is a scenario where, that we could say, the director, again, is concerned about the high number of youth that seem to be becoming young parents. We know this is a very real situation in many THP Plus programs. Maybe the director's noticing, or case managers are reporting, these youth are struggling with achieving their education goals and with working. Parenting is a challenging thing, especially at a young age. And maybe you're wondering, is our program doing enough in the area of reproductive education and prevention? Is our program doing enough to support these youth? How many of these youth are really, becoming parents during the program? And so if you look at this report, you'll see that, and again, this is an entrance to exit report, you'll see that the number of custodial parents actually doubles from entrance to exit here. And this is very real. Like I said, this is real data. This is the reality for many youth in THP+. You'll look at other programs and it may be smaller, it may be larger, but this is this program. And it is a bit concerning. The parenting population is accounting for more than 1/5 of the participants by the time they exit, right? So obviously the next step with that would be to look at maybe why that's happening. So example number 3 is on staff development, and Amy mentioned, it's always great to bring data, to a staff meeting. In this scenario, the program director is, hearing from staff that they're really concerned about employment, right? This is a really big challenge, especially right now. We know that it's a challenging thing to work with youth on, especially for organizations that are not employment programs. We know that we've kind of noticed that that's something that people are really struggling with, especially with the downturn of the economy. And we know that the recession has really affected this population very significantly. So here we go. Here again, you'd run an entrance to exit report, and you'll see that we're using these entrance to exit reports a lot because they're my favorite report actually, because I feel that they really tell you a lot about what's going on in a program. But we will use some different reports later. So this time, you'd ask the system to spit out data on participants who have exited during the past year, because you want to make sure that this data is relevant to when this group of staff was working. They want to see more immediate, kind of what the immediate reality or what the immediate landscape has been. And so you're going to look at the first 3 categories because they represent youth who are employed. So if you look at, we have an area for full-time employment, part-time, and then an even smaller part-time. And, the first 3, if you do a little math, you can get a few different, you can draw a few different conclusions. So first, kind of just a few conclusions that I drew from this. First, 0 youth started off with full-time employment, and 12 exited with full-time employment, and that's great. You can also do a little math and see that 8 started out with jobs. So I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, or if you can just see Amy's mouse. No, I don't think you can, so I'll just describe it. But so you can see that 8 started out with jobs, and 19 exited with jobs, right? So we just added up. For the exit column, we added up those, thank you, Amy, like the Vanna White here, those 3 categories in the beginning, in the first 3. So now I'm going to draw your attention to the bottom 3 categories. The first of the bottom 3, seeking employment, is obviously the group that has not yet found a job, but they report that they're looking, right? The second to last category, not employed and not seeking employment. My optimistic assumption, or I guess you could say my hope, is that the majority of these participants are students, right? And, to find this out, obviously, we'd have to download some participant data in Excel and do some cross-referencing. We can find this out, but it's not something I'm going to do right now just because we want to keep this a little simple and be aware of time here. But that is something you could look into. And then lastly, determined unemployable, SSI eligible, or other. Well, the fact that 4 participants exited in this category is actually not a bad thing. This could mean that, a few things. Maybe someone's out on, disability from their job, but what it usually means is, there's a valid reason that they can't work, and, they maybe have been identified as SSI eligible and now are receiving those benefits that they're entitled to. So that's actually a positive thing. And so if you look at the little narrative on the screen to the right, the second part references, whose goal it is to be working. And I just want to clarify that that means that they fell into the first 4 categories. So when you look at the population of youth whose goal it is to be working, meaning that they're either seeking employment or they are working. 19 out of 38 at exit compared to 8 out of 47 at entrance. And so, you know, that's a positive thing, right? That means that percentage grew. So I'm just going to move along here to our next example. And this is going to be a case where a county administrator really wants to know kind of how their providers are doing. So, you know, some, Amy mentioned earlier, some counties have multiple providers. If you look at the larger counties like LA or San Diego, you know, they have multiple providers. And then you look at some of the smaller counties, and they have one provider. And sometimes it's not necessarily having to do with large or small, but, you know, that tends to be a trend. And so, especially for counties with multiple providers, it's a great way to be able to just look at the overall data on your county and see how youth are doing and how your providers are doing in your county. So again, we ran an entrance to exit report, and I ran it for the duration that has passed of this current fiscal year, so July 1st, 2012 through yesterday, March 26, 2013. So that's the data you're looking at here, and it's on a county who will remain anonymous. And I selected it to pull data on youth of exit during this time period. And again, if you look at the top 3 categories, they account for all employed participants, whether full or part-time. And it looks like a total of 20. If you do that math, 20 participants entered their THP Plus programs employed out of 57 total, so that's 35%. And at exit, 30 out of 57 participants were employed, so that's 53%. So, okay, that's positive, right? Now, what if a county administrator is curious about the issue I brought up on the slide prior? If almost half exit without jobs, so even though, you know, the number with jobs has increased, still half are exiting without jobs, meaning, you know, they're seeking employment or they're not employed and not seeking employment. Well, they're not working. So what are they doing? Are they going to school? So as I mentioned, in order to get an exact answer, you'd have to download data in Excel and do some analysis. But one quick way to kind of satisfy your curiosity a bit on this is to just see how these, you know, same youth are doing overall in the area of educational advancement. Oops. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So next, using the same report, so this is the same report that you're seeing on the left, I just scrolled down to section B, and I looked at percentage change in educational status. And I just want to explain kind of what this means because it looks kind of strange if you've never looked at it before. The increased category accounts for participants who, over the duration of the program, made progress in their education by advancing to a higher up category. And what I mean by this is that they could have gone from the category of dropped out of high school to received a high school diploma, or they could have gone from received a GED to currently enrolled in community college or received an AA degree. So any positive status change recorded in that participant's reports would be calculated in the increased category. Obviously, as you can imagine, the stay the same category just means there was no movement. And the decreased category, you're probably thinking, well, what does that mean? How can a youth go backwards in school? It just means that, you know, a student was maybe, for example, attending college and then dropped out. So that's a decrease. So, oh, there we go. As you can see, over 61% of participants made progress during their time in the program on their educational goals, meaning it's somewhat likely that many of these youth who are not employed are advancing themselves educationally. Again, this is a bit, you know, this is not exact data. You know, if you wanted that, you could get it, but this is kind of just to kind of satisfy your curiosity. And so this is kind of a second part of this same example. So then what if this county administrator says, you know, okay, that's good, but how does my county compare to the rest of the state in the area of employment? So here, we have not seen this report yet. This is the quarterly statewide comparison report. This is also a very cool report. And it provides an overview. I think Amy discussed this one also as of specific program participant characteristics compared to statistics statewide. And what it returns are counts and percentages for 4 questions included in all of the quarterly update forms for active participants on the date you select. So you basically select a quarter, and we go by fiscal quarter. And then it presents these side by side with the statewide counts and averages, as you can see on this report here. And so like the other reports, users may limit the report to those participants who have been in THP Plus for a specified number of months or to those who were or were not custodial parents at any point during the program. So here I selected the report for the most recent quarter, which ended on December 31st, 2012. As many of you know, we are approaching the next quarter end, which is end of this month. But so this is for the last quarter. While this county has a higher percentage of full-time employed participants for the most recent quarter, when you add up employed versus not employed overall, the statewide average is just slightly higher, so it's 55 versus 57% statewide. And so, you know, that you can kind of conclude what you want from that. Maybe the county is happy that they're, you know, pretty comparable to the rest of the state, or maybe they're saying, you know what, we can do better than this. So we will move on to the next example, number 5 here, and this is one of our favorite examples. It's advocacy. It's something that we enjoy doing. And it's a bit more involved, this example, and it's going to really show you how the participant tracking system can really be used for advocacy purposes. And this is a realistic scenario, so Amy and I thought it may be helpful to really actually play this one out. She mentioned this earlier in the presentation. This is something that could very well happen in any of your counties. Your County Board of Supervisors has proposed that the number of THP Plus slots be decreased, that the budget be decreased. Or maybe they're even considering eliminating the budget. It could be either or, you know. You need to make the case that your program is a necessity. It's important. It does good work. It serves the population who otherwise don't have support, and it should not be cut, right? So we are going to pull up a few different reports here. First, we're going to talk about, this is, again, this is an entrance snapshot report, and it's going to lay the groundwork for people to understand the challenges that the population you serve faces. So it's going to focus on demographics, and for this one, we focus on housing. And what this entrance snapshot report does is, I think as Amy mentioned, is it just kind of shows you who your participants are when they enter as far as demographics, housing situations, what they're dealing with when they enter and who they are. And so you can select it for a time period, of course, and it would show you data on participants that entered during that time period. So we're going to focus on housing and homelessness, as I mentioned, and what this number 12, housing before entrance, shows you on the report there is where participants were living immediately prior to entering your program, right? So it's where they were living the day before they entered your program. And as you can see, I hope it's not too small. There are a lot of different options there. There's different foster care placements. There are, you know, other transitional or supportive housing programs, be a dorm, incarcerated, you know, and then, of course, emergency shelter, homeless, or other unstable situation, which could be on the street, in a car, couch surfing. So it really tries to capture kind of a whole gamut of places that young people are coming from, possibly. So what the number 13 tells you is whether or not participants have experienced homelessness at any point between exiting foster care or juvenile probation and entering this program. So, you know, it doesn't mean they were necessarily homeless yesterday, but it means, you know, before they entered the program, but it means that maybe 6 months ago they were living out of their car, and maybe now they're living, you know, on a friend's couch, or maybe they're in a different transitional housing program. And so this excerpt you see, you know, we call this provider Sunshine Youth Program. This, as you can see, 26% of participants experienced homelessness between foster care and THP Plus. And 13% entered directly from homelessness, emergency shelter, other unstable situation. And this could be an excerpt that you distribute to the Board of Supervisors in like a fact sheet or a letter. It could be part of a conversation you have with them in a meeting you schedule or a phone call. It could really, there's a lot of things you can do to reach out to your Board of Supervisors. So the next kind of section of this example, we're going to show progress to the Board of Supervisors in the area of education. And so this is an entrance to exit report. You guys should be familiar with this one by now. And we're going to look at highest education achieved. And what this means is, you know, if a youth did not finish high school, they would be captured in that first category there, right? But the last four that you see circled, it can be assumed that because this is indicating the highest education achieved, it can be assumed that anyone not in the category of some high school, so people in any of the other 4 categories, have clearly either received a diploma or received a GED, right? So if you do the math, that's 93%. That's pretty good. It's a total of 164 participants, so only 12 are in the first category, and that's pretty good for education. And if you look at the little excerpt, obviously it's just kind of bragging about the this good educational outcome here. So lastly, in this example, we're going to move on to employment, another important thing that people are always discussing, and this is also an entrance to exit report. The last 2 categories we will count out because they're not, these are the participants who are not employable or not seeking employment. So what we're going to look at are the top 4 categories. We're going to consider those fair game because those are youth who they have a goal of being employed, right? So there's a few different ways you can kind of present data here, and I don't want to say manipulate data, but I really want to say that, what are you trying to tell this group of people? You can talk about total youth, and you can use all of the youth included in this report, or you can pull a subset and say, well, of the youth whose goal it was to be employed, how many were employed, right? And you may get a different number than if you include all the other youth. So out of the youth whose goal it was to be employed, right, 91 of them, so 53%, are employed. I hope you stayed with me through that explanation. I know it's a bit confusing. And again, if you have questions, please enter them in the question box to the right-hand side of your screen, and we will address them after this presentation. And so just one other quick note on this, you always want to pull in outside data as well. Maybe even it says here, even during an economic downturn, where transition-age youth have been disproportionately, I must have accidentally hit that, sorry guys, disproportionately detrimentally affected in the area of employment. You may even want to pull out pull out data on youth this age and how they've been affected by the recession, and throw that in there as well. Even with this, over half of those youth seeking employment have secured a job by the time they exit the program. So of course that's going to kind of enrich the information that you're giving to the Board of Supervisors. Okay, so this is our last example, and it's a short one, and it's another example on advocacy and kind of organizational development. And as you know, or maybe as you don't know, I don't know, many THP Plus providers have participated in advocacy activities over the past several years when the budget was threatened multiple times. The THP Plus budget, we've fought to sustain it, and many providers came to Sacramento and testified, and people wrote letters, and people also submitted op-eds. So that's just an example kind of how an op-ed can be used. We'll take it to a recent kind of a reality that's happening now, is that there's been recent coverage of how unemployment is down. But we know that, the participants in THP Plus, we know that they are still very challenged in that area, and that they maybe are not recovering yet from the recession. And so you may see, this coverage, you may see an article on this or something, and you say, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to write an op-ed in response to this article. So we just have a little kind of excerpt example, while recent figures from the Department of Labor indicate that American workers are beginning to recover from the Great Recession, there is a group of workers that continues to struggle, youth who age out of the foster care system. And then after that, you would, obviously include your program's data, include a policy recommendation. And like I said, there are some great op-eds that have been done in the past few years by THP Plus providers, and I think they're on our THP Plus website under the media section. I remember one came out of the Merced Espirinet, Luis Madrid. I don't know if he's on the webinar, but we love to give people props. He did a great op-ed that got published, I believe, in their local newspaper, or maybe it was the SACB. I can't remember. I don't want to misspeak, but it's, I believe, on our website. And so we love when things like that happen. It's great. So kind of wrapping up here, the last kind of piece of this webinar is to discuss what's new. So some of you have heard we have made some changes to the participant tracking system. We wanted to, it was created in 2008. It was really thought out when it was created. How can it be of best service to providers, to us, to counties, to be used for advocacy purposes? How can it best service kind of all the people it's needing to service? And so, of course, now we are 5 years down the line, and we get, we've over the years have been getting feedback from county administrators and from providers that say, hey, it would be great. It would be great if the system could do this, or it'd be great if you could make this change. And of course, some of those things, unfortunately, we cannot do, but some of them we can, and we did. And this is not the end of the changes. We'll probably continue to make small tweaks to the system, and it takes longer than you would think to make some simple changes. Sometimes I call our database person and I say, hey, wouldn't it be really easy to make this change? And he goes, unfortunately not. That's very complicated. And sometimes it's the opposite. So, we've done our best to kind of keep up with feedback and make changes to help providers make the best use of the system and counties. So the first change that we made was, we're very excited about this. Reports can now be exported in Excel. Now, I know some of you have been waiting for this for a long time, and you'll see at the bottom of the screen when you go to, this is what it looks like when you go to produce a report. You have this list of optional reports to produce. You can see there's the date range, there's all this other stuff you enter. And then at the very bottom, you can now choose, do you want it in the same old formatted HTML that you've been getting it in, which is great as well, or do you want to export it in an Excel spreadsheet? And so that's a very exciting thing, because now, people who have been doing more with their data, they say, well, we pull this report up and we have to transfer it into Excel, and it takes time. Now that's happening already, for them. For some of these reports, you do need, just a clarification, you do need the code book, because it will come up, for example, I'll give you a simple example. If a participant says yes, that's going to be a 1. If participant says no, that's going to be a 2. So for some of these reports, it's going to come up as 1s and 2s instead of yeses and nos. And so you have to decode that if, depending on what kind of analysis you want to do. And those of you who are familiar with this type of analysis, you guys know about, using a code book. But I'm happy to, I'm around to provide TA if you guys are if anyone's confused about the code book and how to apply it to these Excel spreadsheets. I'm happy to help. This code book will be available. It has previously not been posted on our website, something we noticed when we were putting this webinar together. We will be posting it on the website. The reason it's not on there now is I'll let you in a little something that's going on here. We are upgrading the THP Plus website. Very excited about that. If you've noticed, it's a little bit archaic, so we're changing it. We're upgrading it 2013. And so with those changes will appear the code book and a few other documents. And so we're hoping that'll happen, in the next week or so. And so next, another thing that we've done is we've removed the unknown data from the reports. And that doesn't mean that they're permanently removed from the results. So don't worry if you've been wanting to track that. It's still available. But the reports that come out, as you can see, this is an old report. It used to come up a category that was unknown, and what that means is that when data was being entered, maybe the participant didn't know the answer to this, maybe they refused to, they didn't want to answer, and so an unknown box gets checked for that question, and of course that happens, as you can see on this one, well, it's 3%, not that many, which is good. But, it's a necessary category. It's staying on the form, so it's not going to be removed. It's still an option. But the nice thing that we have now is that, as you can see, it's not included in the results. But it is included in the top section. It says, see here, 19 of 605 participants statewide had missing or unknown values. So then you still know what that piece is. It's just pulled out of the calculations below, so you don't have to recalculate percentages, and it was kind of a pain. So that is also a change. So this is the last section of our webinar, just on assistance. Amy and I are available here at the John Burton Foundation. I'm kind of the go-to person if you have a question or you need help with running reports or entering forms, or administrative support, meaning you need a new password, you need you have a new case manager who needs to be trained, you know, any of these things, you're interested in becoming a new user, you can email or call me. And then we always point people to these training and technical assistance documents that on the left side are available on the website. You know, there's that original training webinar for providers and also for counties, and that'll show you how to enter forms. It's almost like a, excuse me, it's almost like a walkthrough of the manual. And then there's also a webinar, training webinar on the reporting functions. So it doesn't take things as far as we took them in this webinar, and you know, it basically shows you how to run the reports and what they'll give you. And then there will be this overview webinar also available within a week. And then the last three are just the manuals and the code book, and those are available electronically. And we may have a few hard copies laying around if you want one sent to you, but I don't have any. I can't promise because I don't know how many we have left. And lastly, just if you think an in-person session is necessary, that may be able to be arranged, you know, depending on where you're located and if it's really necessary. So now I'm actually going to pass this back over to Amy, and she's going to help us out with just moderating this question and answer session. So go ahead and enter your questions if you have not already.
Great. Thank you very much, Simone. As you can tell, we got our PowerPoint upgrade. We decided to really try and use its full functionality there. So a few questions. Well, one thing, just to share with you, Simone, that it's always interesting using GoToWebinar. My control panel has disappeared, so I'm going to need to ask you to look at the questions. We do have a handful of questions that were submitted in advance, and we'll start with those, and then as Simone has the opportunity to cruise through the ones that are submitted online, we will address those. So the first one, and I can answer this, is a question we get a lot. And this is around, does the participant tracking system track whether a youth has been in THP Plus before entering another program? So we all know that cumulatively a young person's eligible for 24 months of THP Plus. And so is there a way, if a young person was in provider A, that their case could be linked when they enter program provider B? And the answer to that is no. And that is definitely a shortcoming of the system. Essentially, we had to make the decision. It happens. It's pretty rare. And for the cost and time and complexity, we've had to make that call. So that is, I think, a shortcoming. It will track, if the young person's immediate placement or where they lived immediately prior to entering, there is a place to select another THP Plus program. But there isn't a way to merge what their experience was in provider A with their new experience when they join your program. So, and that also just raises a very practical consideration of being in communication with either the other provider and or county if they've used a certain number of months of eligibility at that provider. Making sure that you know about that and the county knows about that, and that it is considered and accounted for so that it can be administered fairly. Okay. Okay, we'll go to just a few more questions, and the next one, Simone, I'll hand over to you. This one is, does the participant tracking system track involuntary exits?
So that's a good question. We know that's a concern for a lot of providers and counties. Just that's not something we want. So it's definitely something that we want to track. Yes, it does track involuntary exits, but they're not actually tracked on any of the reports. So the way that you would get that data is you would export your data into an Excel spreadsheet, and then with a couple of clicks, you would basically just sort your data by that response set, and you could get the answer to that question. So yes, it does track that, and if you need help on learning how to get that to look at that, I can again just walk you through it. It's literally like 4 clicks in Excel, and you get your answer. So it's not hard. It just unfortunately doesn't come through on any of those reports.
Great, thank you. Another question someone submitted earlier in the web seminar, which is, do we use this tracking system to track young people in THP Plus and THP Plus foster care? This is a database for young people in THP+. But you certainly raise an interesting question because, and essentially, young people in THP+ foster care are part of the dependency system. All their information is tracked through CWS CMS, and that is quite a system, I must say. I mean, it gets a lot of grief, but really it does a lot. It has a lot of functionality, and most importantly, it helps us understand whether, compliance with the AB 636 measures as well as the federal outcome measures. It doesn't provide the kind of information that we talked about today around employment and education, incarceration, income, LGBTQ status, disability. So it reports, and that is unfortunate, but that is where we're at. I think there's a overall general recognition that that we need to get better at measuring the quality of the child welfare experience. But this system really is for THP+ participants. But very good question. Okay, so another question we have is about custodial parents, and I'll ask this to you, Simone. You showed us how to track custodial parents. What about parents who are not custodial? Is there a way we can track them in the PTS? And I'm assuming that this question is referring to young people who are fathers who are not custodial parents, or mothers who do not have custody of their children for whatever reason.
Okay, so yes, there is an additional question that asks if the participants have birthed or fathered any children. So this question is in addition to, and I think that's how it's phrased, I'm pretty sure. This is separate from the question that says, is the participant a custodial parent? I think it's directly before that question, and it says, has the participant birthed or fathered any children? So, I mean, just to kind of clarify, though, I mean, this does not necessarily mean that youth are always going to be truthful about their reproductive histories, which is totally understandable, and we know that that happens. But there is a question that's going to, you're going to get the answer that the youth is going to give you. So it's going to track whatever that youth is reporting about being a parent, right? I mean, obviously, if you're a custodial parent, you can see, obviously, that the youth has the child, so that's one that's easy to verify. But there are some of these questions that you don't always know, for sure they're not verifiable. And so all you can do is just, trust what the, it looks like Amy got her control panel back. You can only trust, what the participant is telling you.
Sorry, I had to see behind the curtain there for a minute, but I lost my questions. Another great question, has there been a program development portion for special needs clients, such as young people who are receiving SSI or our regional center clients? The answer to that is no. The same data is collected. I mean, we definitely know if they are in receipt of SSI, but there is not like a separate set of indicators that might measure their program. They're a different set of criteria. The same data is collected, but it looks like Simone wants to add something to that to answer.
You said it. It's that we track whether or not they are receiving SSI, and we also track some of the treatment services they're receiving at exit. So I can't recall all of them. I think there's substance. I mean, and this brings in different different populations, but this, substance abuse treatment. I believe mental health services, and I just can't off the top of my head remember the other ones. But there's I think it's like 5 questions that track different types of treatment services. And it's in the exit report, and so it tracks whether youth are receiving those at exit. So that's kind of the gist of that.
Okay. Next question is about health information. What information regarding a youth's health does it track? This is an area where that is not as extensive as the employment and education. It does track whether a young person has health insurance. I'm really glad this question came up. As I think most folks know, effective January 1st, 2014, any young person who was in foster care on their 18th birthday will be able to extend Medicaid to age 26, And so that means all young people in THP Plus will be Medicaid, or we call it in California, Medi-Cal eligible. So any young person, like if you run your report, and I have a sample report for the state right now, as a state, 77% of young people have health insurance, and it says 23% do not. So if you were an administrator of your program or a county administrator and you ran that, that should be 100% after January 1st, every young person. So this is a great way of knowing, are we doing the outreach we need to do? Because this new policy provision doesn't just apply prospectively. Any young person who is under age 26 who is in care on their 18th birthday is Medicaid eligible. So that's just another example how to use this. Now I know you see something on your screen. I'm going to not touch that because that's what made the questions go away before. Yeah, someone's kind of looking at me like, make that go away. Another question. This question is concerning the THP Plus foster care youth. I partly heard your response. Did you state this group will not be tracked along with the emancipated THP Plus youth? That is correct. These young people in THP Plus foster care are not kind of the intended audience for this participant tracking system. Although I have to admit, in the course of this web seminar, my curiosity is certainly piqued about whether we could add this functionality, because honestly, if there would be some way to add a separate filter, they're all legal adults. Just with the current participant tracking system, the young people need to consent to have their information entered. I think this is something we shouldn't rule out, that I think deserves a little bit more investigation, because, you know, again, the CWS CMS provides a lot of great information, but it doesn't provide this kind of program management information. This system's built, it's managed. You know, I think it's something we should look into, Simone, and report back and have a conversation with DSS and the counties about, is there any legal restriction that would prevent it? Is there any practical reason why not? It's already voluntary. It already requires the use consent as a, so, you know, maybe there's some potential here. So thank you for raising that, and I don't want to rule it out just because we haven't thought about it. I mean, this could be a really great way of continuing to collect data to manage programs well, to manage them for excellence to young people. I will just take a few more questions, and I think we'll probably wrap up. Another question is, what about criminal justice information? What information does the system collect? Simone, why don't you answer that?
Okay. Again, I can't remember exactly how all of the questions are phrased, but there are two. Oh, Amy has the questions for me, so I can actually I know exactly how they're phrased. So there's a question that asks whether or not the participant has been incarcerated or detained in the adult criminal justice system since entering THP Plus. And then, like I said, there's two questions. And then there's a second question that asks whether the participant has had an adult conviction since entering THP Plus. And the answers to that one, you can say none, adult misdemeanor conviction, or adult felony conviction. So it's tracked, you know, that one is, you know, it's not just the yes or no. So it's those two questions. That is where it's tracked. There's also that's the adult criminal justice system. Did the person ask about the juvenile? Okay. Well, just so you know, there is a question that asks on their entrance form or their participant overview form whether or not they were a probation ward. So between those three kind of questions, you cover juvenile justice and adult criminal justice system.
And this is a really good question because I think, you know, the employment data, I mean, honestly, these young people are struggling. I mean, they're having an experience that is not unlike the rest of 18 to 24-year-olds, which is they have the least education and the least experience in a recovering economy. But the criminal justice outcomes are where this program is shining. When you look at the Midwest evaluation on the outcomes of adult foster youth, which is led by Mark Courtney, and you look at that 18 to 21-year-old time period, the criminal justice involvement is through the roof. I think it is absolutely safe to say that this program is a protective factor for criminal justice involvement young people, again, they're not all going off to Harvard and they're not all getting $50,000 a year jobs, but we can say absolutely that they're not engaging in the criminal justice system at the rate that their peers are if they're not in a THP Plus program. And again, what I would just encourage is watch those headlines and try and find an excuse to share this news with your community. If you do an electronic newsletter, a little blog post, if you engage with the local media, sharing it with your staff, sharing it with your young people. Did you guys know how well you are doing, that you are literally beating the odds, how proud you should be for all your hard work? I mean, there's a lot of good news in this data, but we can only share it if we enter it. And that's kind of one other point I want to make is many of you saw when Simone was presenting her examples, there is not a small amount of missing data. Some questions are very well answered, and the data, there's almost no missing data. And then we see kind of systematically some questions are not answered as completely. And so that is something we can't make any conclusions if we don't have the data. And so that really requires a level of management on our part so that when we see a provider who's kind of consistently not answering a question, we can have a conversation and say, is that because you don't understand the question? Is that because trying to understand it, but also as an administrator of the program, being curious about that. And it may be there's a misunderstanding. It may be because the terms of the question aren't correct, but we do want to have as much completed data as possible so that we can feel as confident as possible about the conclusions that we are making. So I think that with that, we don't have any more questions that have come through. If anyone does have any additional questions about the participant tracking system or ways to use it, we are happy to answer those questions. And I just want to thank everyone again, and absolutely thank Simone, who spends a lot of time managing this system, responding to questions, and trying to make sure that it's a quality system for all of your work on the system, and then for everyone's work in the community on behalf of children and youth in foster care, and those who are formerly in foster care. And we will be back in touch with you about this interesting proposal that has surfaced on the web seminar about whether it could be used for young people in THP Plus foster care, not in substitution of CWS CMS. I mean, that is the mothership of child welfare data, but as a complementary database if you're interested in knowing this similar information about young people in your THP Plus foster care program. So again, thanks very much, and this concludes today's web seminar.